everyone, glad to see you back on the channel. Today we're diving into a story that still feels unreal to many people around the world. It's the story of how the war in Ukraine didn't just reshape battlefields, but sent shockwaves through Russia's economy, military, technology, and society, pushing large parts of the country backward in ways few predicted. What began as a show of force turned into a grinding conflict that exposed deep weaknesses and triggered a collapse that some now describe as a return to the Stone Age. At the start of the war, Russia projected confidence. Its leadership believed the conflict would be short, decisive, and controlled. Russian state media spoke of strength, unity, and technological superiority. But war has a way of tearing away illusions, and as months turned into years, the cost became impossible to hide. The strain didn't just appear at the front lines. It crept into factories, homes, schools, hospitals, and everyday life. One of the earliest cracks appeared in Russia's economy. Sanctions hit faster and harder than many expected. Western countries froze assets, cut off banks from global systems, and restricted access to advanced technology. At first, officials claimed Russia was immune. They said the country would simply pivot east, replace imports, and emerge stronger. In reality, entire industries began to choke almost immediately. Factories that relied on foreign parts suddenly found themselves unable to operate. Assembly lines slowed, then stopped. Airplanes were grounded because spare parts were no longer available. Cars were produced without basic safety features. Consumer electronics vanished from shelves or reappeared at triple the price. Inflation surged, and ordinary Russians felt their purchasing power evaporate. The technology sector suffered a particularly brutal collapse. Modern Russia depended heavily on imported microchips, software, and industrial equipment. When access was cut off, there was no quick replacement. Domestic alternatives simply did not exist at the required scale or quality. Companies began scavenging parts from old machines just to keep essential systems running. This wasn't innovation, it was survival. As technology declined, productivity followed. Industries reverted to older methods, less efficient tools, and manual labor. In some cases, factories reportedly turned back to equipment from the Soviet era, pulled out of storage or museums. This wasn't nostalgia, it was desperation. The idea of a high-tech, modern economy faded rapidly as Russia struggled to maintain even basic industrial output. The military, once portrayed as unstoppable, faced its own devastating reckoning. Early losses in Ukraine were staggering. Tanks, armored vehicles, aircraft, and missiles were destroyed in numbers that shocked observers. Replacing them proved far harder than expected. Advanced weapons relied on foreign components that were now banned. Production slowed to a crawl. Reports began to emerge of Russian forces using outdated gear, sometimes decades old. Soldiers were sent into combat with poor equipment, limited training, and inadequate supplies. Stories circulated of units lacking basic medical kits, proper winter clothing, or even reliable food. Logistics collapsed under the weight of corruption and poor planning. The war also drained Russia's most valuable resource, people. Hundreds of thousands were killed or wounded. Many more fled the country to avoid conscription or economic hardship. This brain drain hit especially hard in fields like engineering, IT, science, and medicine. Young, educated Russians left for Europe, Central Asia, and beyond, taking skills that Russia desperately needed. Inside the country, fear replaced confidence. Mobilization orders sent shockwaves through families. Men went into hiding or fled across borders. Entire communities were hollowed out as working-age adults disappeared. Businesses closed not only because of sanctions, but because there were no workers left to run them. The impact on infrastructure was slow but relentless. With budgets diverted to the war, maintenance of roads, power grids, and public services suffered. Aging infrastructure, already neglected for years, began to fail. Blackouts became more common in some regions. Water systems broke down. Rural areas, in particular, were hit hard. Healthcare took a severe blow. Sanctions restricted access to modern medical equipment and pharmaceuticals. Hospitals struggled to replace essential devices. Doctors faced shortages of critical medicines. In some areas, treatments that were once routine became unavailable. Mortality rates rose, not only from war injuries, but from preventable illnesses. Education also declined. Universities lost funding, faculty, and international partnerships. Research programs were canceled. Students found themselves cut off from global knowledge networks. In schools, resources dwindled. Teachers left for better opportunities or were drafted. The future workforce began to shrink in both size and quality. Information control tightened as conditions worsened. Independent media was silent. Social platforms were blocked or heavily censored. The state tried to maintain the narrative of resilience and victory, but reality seeped through cracks. People saw prices rising, services failing, and loved ones not returning from the front. In rural regions, the collapse felt even more severe. Many villages already struggled before the war. After it began, investment dried up completely. Young people left. Farms lacked fuel, machinery, and spare parts. Some communities reverted to subsistence living, growing food for survival rather than trade. Barter replaced cash in certain areas. Energy, once Russia's greatest strength, became both a weapon and a weakness. While oil and gas exports continued in some form, infrastructure limitations and price caps reduced profits. Revenues fell short of expectations. Meanwhile, domestic energy infrastructure aged and deteriorated. Maintenance suffered and accidents increased. Transportation networks degraded. Railways struggled with overuse and lack of parts. Airlines cannibalized planes to keep others flying. Long-distance travel became unreliable and expensive. Isolation grew, not just internationally, but within the country itself. The war also shattered trust between the state and society. Official promises rang hollow. Veterans returned traumatized, often without proper support. Families of the dead received little more than symbolic gestures. Anger simmered beneath the surface, even as open protest was crushed. Corruption, already endemic, worsened under pressure. Scarcity created opportunities for profiteering. Funds meant for the military or public services disappeared. Equipment was sold on black markets. Accountability vanished as survival became the priority for those in power. Culturally, the impact was profound. Russia's global isolation cut artists, athletes, and academics off from international audiences. Events were canceled, exchanges ended. A sense of being cut off from the world took hold. For many Russians, the future felt smaller, darker, and more uncertain. The war also rewrote Russia's demographic future. Low birth rates combined with emigration and casualties created a looming population crisis. Entire regions faced long-term decline. Fewer workers meant lower output, less innovation, and a heavier burden on social systems. As the conflict dragged on, the idea of recovery grew distant. Rebuilding would require money, technology, trust, and human capital. All were in short supply. Even if the war ended tomorrow, the damage would take decades to repair. Some analysts describe this regression as a return to the Stone Age, not because Russia literally lost all technology, but because it lost momentum. Progress reversed. Systems that took generations to build unraveled in a few years. The promise of modernization was replaced by improvisation and decay. For ordinary Russians, daily life became an exercise in adaptation. People learned to live with shortages, outdated tools, and limited options. Survival skills mattered more than ambition. The future was no longer about advancement, but endurance. Internationally, Russia's influence shrank. Allies kept their distance. Former partners sought alternatives. The country that once claimed superpower status found itself increasingly dependent on a small number of relationships, often on unfavorable terms. The psychological toll cannot be overstated. A society raised on narratives of strength and resilience now faced humiliation and loss. Cognitive dissonance became a survival mechanism. Many retreated into apathy, focusing only on their immediate circles. Looking back, the most shocking part is not just the scale of the collapse, but how quickly it happened. Systems that seemed solid were revealed to be fragile. The war didn't create all these problems, but it accelerated them at breathtaking speed. History will debate responsibility, strategy, and missed opportunity. But for those living through it, the experience is painfully real. The war in Ukraine didn't just redraw borders or shift alliances. It plunged Russia into a period of regression that may define a generation. What we're witnessing is not just a military conflict, but a case study in how modern states can unravel when ambition outpaces reality. It's a reminder that power built on illusion can collapse faster than anyone expects. As the world watches, the long-term consequences are still unfolding. The question is no longer whether the war changed Russia, but how deep and permanent that change will be. One thing is clear. The cost has been staggering, and the road back, if it exists at all, will be long, uncertain, and painful. If there's one lesson to take away, it's this. Wars are never confined to battlefields. They reach into every corner of society, reshaping nations in ways that no propaganda can fully hide. And in Russia's case, the plunge has been far deeper than anyone dared to imagine. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel.